Hey everyone, welcome back to theclinicaltrialsguru.com. Again, that website address is theclinicaltrialsguru.com. And I'm very lucky to actually do a follow-up interview. One of our most popular interviews ever, Craig, was our first one we did with you. And so I'm very happy to be doing this follow-up interview, and I think it's very important for the industry to learn more about this. But I'm interviewing Craig Lipset. He's the Director of Clinical Innovation at Pfizer. And Craig played a large role in the virtual clinical trial. A lot of people, especially the internet, is buzzing about this virtual clinical trial. Some people call it a failure. Others say it's very innovative and it's revolution. And we're going to get into the details, but Craig is, pretty much behind this trial. And the trial, correct me if I'm wrong, Craig, ended in June of this year?
That's right. We shut down enrollment for new patients back in June.
And it will be reopening, or you guys will be doing another study next year?
Our plans right now, Dan, are to try and take advantage of whatever worked immediately and then to regroup as far as the overall concept. And what I mean by that is we really looked at all along this trial as a series of modules, a series of pieces that we were connecting together. Screening and consenting patients online, shipping blinded study drug, capturing data by mobile, and so on. Some of those pieces worked, a lot of them did, some of them didn't. So step one for us is to take advantage of what worked, and we want to do that immediately.
Okay. And we're definitely going to talk about what did work. And I'm one of the believers in this concept. There's a lot of critics, probably because they're threatened by this. But I think it's something that's necessary. And as you've no doubt probably heard, there's been a lot of collaboration in this industry. A lot of big pharma companies who used to not share data are now beginning to share data in many different ways. Not just sharing actual data, but sharing resources, sharing what research clinics they're using, sharing what kind of trainings have been done. I believe this is something that big pharma is considering necessary to do in order to compete in this new environment. What are your thoughts on this?
Dan, I think pharma companies have become very progressive in redefining the areas in which they compete. We compete with the quality of the medicines that we're developing. We'll compete with the quality of the protocols that we'll write to test those medicines. But there are a long list of places where we don't compete. And we don't need to compete in training investigator sites on GCP and finding those sites and all of those other activities. And so as we've really wised up to this notion that there are a lot of areas that we can work together around and fix this system together, you're seeing a lot more collaboration, as you pointed to, groups like Transcelerate, Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative, and so on.
Yes, I mean, I've thought of this for years, and I thought, I understand that, a lot of these companies are competitors in the marketplace, but it just does not make any sense for us to waste so much time with training and with site selections and things like that. It's just raising the cost for everyone. So I think we're finally getting to that point.
Yep, it adds cost, it adds time, and from a site perspective, it adds a lot of frustration for limited resources. And GCP training is just great low-hanging fruit that everybody can agree on. GCP is GCP, and we should be able to agree on what a minimum training threshold is, and at the very least start off by mutual recognition and having confidence that if Johnson & Johnson trained you last month, that should be good enough for Pfizer. And if Pfizer trained you last month, that should be good enough for another company in that ecosystem. And hopefully that can start a process of identifying all those other places where we have something during, say, study startup, which is shared and common to all, site qualification surveys, other types of data sharing. And we'll see how far that spirit of sharing goes. Will it carry all the way through to other information about investigator site performance? And are we willing to share more information in that regard? I think that it's a healthy step.
Mm-hmm. I think we've all agreed on the idea that this is the right idea, and we'll see, as you know, and things in this industry take long for them to actually happen. So we'll see how the execution goes. But I think we all agree on the idea.
Yeah.
Now, Craig, let's talk a little bit about. We're going to get into what worked for this virtual clinical trial. And for those of you who don't know, I mean, you could watch the first video we did where we talk about what the virtual trial is. But essentially, is it called the trial in a box? Is that actually what it's called, or is that what the media calls it?
I think that's more of immediate jargon. For us, it was the acronym for the protocol was the remote study.
Okay.
And internally, we referred to this as a participatory patient-centered trial, PPC. But I think in the media, it just was more clever as a virtual trial or as a trial in a box.
Yes, it's
The
more
trial in a
effective.
box notion really referred to this idea that can we basically give the patient in a box all the tools that they need to participate in a clinical trial from home or wherever they may be.
Mm-hmm. And absolutely every tool, right? I mean, informed consent was done by the patients online. Their diaries, where they got their labs drawn or their blood drawn, they had to actually go someplace, but it wasn't a research clinic, right?
That's right.
So this was the first trial that was done without the use of a research clinic.
You know, I would say that's true for a trial of an investigational drug. I mean, I think a lot of observational studies have taken some similar approaches for years,
Right.
but they don't have to live up to the same regulatory and ethical scrutiny that a clinical trial under an IND with an investigational drug would need to. And that was really the bar that we had to clear.
Right. So let's talk about, because you guys did this did it start in 2010 or 2011? When did the trial start?
I think in terms of enrollment, we started in early 2011.
Okay.
But certainly the planning for this dated back before then.
Mm-hmm. And let's talk first about what did not work. So you guys were hoping that online recruitment would really play a large role in this. And what kind of things were you doing? Was it just Google Ads, or was it more than that?
Sure. So yeah, the aspiration for the model was, can we identify most all of these patients through online channels? That certainly starts with some very routine online advertising like Google Ads, Craigslist, reaches into other social media channels, some of the more mainstream, less healthcare, YouTube, and then extends into some of the more healthcare-oriented social media channels that we were working with, online communities, online bloggers, as well as trying to explore opportunities to tap into health information technology and electronic health records along the way. But that did not deliver the patients ultimately that we were looking for. What it did deliver is tens of thousands of patients to our website who created accounts. And in creating an account, I think that confirmed for us patient interest. There were a lot of patients out there. Obviously, I think a lot of our competitors were interested, maybe, but I don't think that can account for tens of thousands
Right, not quite that amount
of accounts created. Unless, Dan, you were very busy creating a lot of accounts to test the system.
Oh, yeah, sure.
But otherwise, I think it helped to confirm for us that there were a lot of patients that are interested in this type of approach, but that wasn't enough for us, right? We needed patients that were eligible for this study, and that means both having the disease that we wanted, but the disease with the appropriate severity that we needed to enroll in the study. And I think that's where we broke down. We were able to find women of the right demographic. We were able to find women with overactive bladder, but we could not find women with overactive bladder of sufficient disease severity to really drive a meaningful number of patients.
Mm-hmm. Well, but there is a positive side to that, and it's the fact that, and Quintiles released a study on this just a few weeks ago. I guess they kind of confirmed that online patients do not lie, right? So someone who's not familiar with this industry would think, okay, maybe some of these people are just putting whatever they think the researchers are looking for so they can qualify. But that study, and then maybe this study that you guys did, proves that people are not online lying about the severity of their illnesses just to enroll in clinical trials.
That's a great observation. And, I think the other thing that I really like about the The quintiles experiment is a demonstration of how far you can go combining patient self-reported data with access to their medical records and abstracting from their medical records. Now, in the case with quintiles, because they're relying on a lot of the healthcare system our patients have today, that meant a lot of paper systems. But we can envision where that's going thanks to the proliferation of electronic health records, the fact that your doctor and my doctor are busy switching over to EMRs today because of the incentives the federal government are giving them to switch to electronic health records, and what will happen when you and I have access to our electronic health data, so that in that future, patients don't just have to self-report or not, but actually can just give access to their electronic health data, those labs, images, and other data for research participation.
Mm-hmm. Was this study for Pfizer that you guys did a must-win, or was it more of a curiosity experiment?
No, the drug, ultimately, we're a pharmaceutical company. We're developing new medicines. The medicine in question here was commercialized, well-characterized, and a very widely used product. So this was really about our ability to develop and test new methods. We feel that we got a lot out of it in terms of learning about some of the modules that did work hands down, and our focus is on taking advantage of those. But one thing people, I think in the media sometimes don't appreciate is in the world of research and development, learning something doesn't work can be pretty darn important as well.
Right.
And so understanding some of the strengths and limitations of the various channels we use for online outreach can be equally important to us.
Mm-hmm. In this study, were you guys targeting patients who already uploaded their electronic records online, or could it have been just anyone with an overactive bladder who had an interest?
Yeah, in this study, they did not have to have access to their electronic health records. So for this study, it could have been any patient in a predefined state who had the appropriate symptoms.
Mm-hmm. And what could you guys have done differently to have better success as far as recruiting online?
I'll tell you one thing that I think we could have done differently, and that we'll look at in any future models here, is the role of the patient's treating physician in helping them make a decision about whether to participate. So when we're reaching out to patients online, we're catching them kind of cold, right? Most patients out there, data from Tufts and elsewhere will tell us 3 out of 4 don't even know how to participate in a research study if they were interested. So they're not really primed, if you will. They're not informed, they're not educated, so we're getting them kind of cold. I expect many of them will go back to their treating docs, their healthcare providers, and ask them, should I or should I not participate? I think in today's ecosystem, in today's healthcare system, I can't really see many reasons why a patient's treating physician would tell them to participate in a research study. And you probably see this from an investigator side perspective as well. How many patients come into your research programs as referrals from doctors in the community? Could you really rely just on that as a channel, or do we have to do more to sort of plant those seeds and educate and inform those docs about sharing their patients, some of the importance of that, and try and make that something that's more palatable? I would say that for most primary care physicians, you make your money by seeing patients today. And so taking that patient and sending them off to be in a research study isn't exactly a very good business model for them. So we have to make that more interesting, more engaging for them, and find ways the treating physicians can really participate without being an investigator.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to ask you a social media question, because I got a tweet question from some Twitter followers out there. And when I use the word social media, I'm really talking about the internet in its present day. Because 10 years ago, email was huge, and Web 1.0, and then Web 2.0, and now we're calling it social media. But at the end of the day, it's the internet, right? So what value did social media add to this study? And let's start with that question. What value can it add, and then what value did it not add to this study? Maybe we're too early.
I think that when we look at who patients trust, they trust other patients, and then they trust their healthcare providers. And so we want to, as I said a moment ago, make sure that their healthcare providers are sort of primed and informed, and we have good roles for them. But we also know patients trust other patients. We know from data from Pew and others that patients look for other patients online and seek input on how those patients have best managed their health conditions to maintain their quality of life. So for me, social media is an opportunity to help inform some of that discussion, help participate wherever we can. But wherever we can, how can we take patients who have participated in research and use social media to turn them into ambassadors and amplify that voice so that it becomes clear that a patient in a research study is not a guinea pig, but in the words of Sisgrip and the folks up in that nonprofit, they're a medical hero, and that we would not have any new medical product development if not for patients being willing to participate in research studies. So I think we need to find ways to use social media to help patients share those stories so that other patients can have confidence participating.
Mm-hmm. So I'm starting to get this sense that social media is a tool, not necessarily a strategy. So it shouldn't be your only strategy, for recruiting in an online trial is to use social media. That's not enough.
I think you're right. I think on the one hand, a lot of people ask me if this means we should not use social media for a mainstream conventional trial or other digital channels. I think that's an incorrect conclusion.
Right.
The study itself was unique, as you pointed out, in being entirely online. You need to use recruitment channels that are fit for purpose to reach the patient population you're targeting for your study. But as you pointed out, I agree. If I were doing another virtual trial, or when I take calls from other companies that are considering that, I do encourage taking diverse approaches, use social, find other channels, engage other treating physicians.
Right, yeah, and for the critics out there who say, oh, okay, this is an example of how social media cannot work for clinical trials, I think they're very wrong. I mean, if you say that you're essentially betting against the internet. And that would be like betting against email 10 years ago or 15 years ago. I mean, email is a critical component of business now. So I think social media, it will be an important tool, but like I said, it's not going to be and should not be the main strategy.
Right.
Like you
Right.
said.
I would not want to, be the guy at Kodak or at Borders Books who had said, let's bet against digital and the internet. Those are all just fads.
Mm-hmm.
And, when I sit with patients, I've had a few opportunities to sit with patients who are very prolific bloggers or active participants in social media. And when you talk to patients who've been in clinical trials and are active on social media, to me, that's a very interesting patient to try to understand and help them to amplify that voice, because that's a story we need to get out there and let patients hear from other patients.
Mm-hmm. Now let's talk about what did work, and this is kind of like the future of clinical trials. I'm thinking it's going to be more of a hybrid model. And you mentioned something earlier that I found interesting about the physicians and how you guys are trying to get physicians more involved. Could we be seeing the advent of a new type of investigator who's maybe not as involved in the actual study, but can be more of a referral source? And you guys would team with this person to help recruitment. Could that be a possibility?
Dan, I do believe that we do have a new role for physicians to play in research, and that today a physician has a choice of either just being a treating physician and perhaps referring patients, and we know most of them will not refer their patients,
right,
or they have a choice of trying to become an investigator. And we know that can be very challenging and disruptive to a physician with a vibrant practice. So what I believe is we have the opportunity for a new model, a new role for treating physicians to participate without necessarily becoming an investigator. And a core part of the remote trial was creating a centralized investigator who did all of the heavy lifting as related to GCP, as related to the ethical and legal obligations of a principal investigator in the study, and can essentially enable a treating physician to share data and information and insight, and we can share back with them so that they can participate without having to be on a 1572 as an investigator or sub-investigator. And in doing that, it frees them up to do their day job and moves and makes sure that there is a well-trained PI that's overseeing the role of the patient in the study. And personally, I'm very keen about seeing how we can further develop around that model. I think it enables an important desired future where healthcare and research can get closer together, and where the doctor doesn't have to change their role to become an investigator, and the patient doesn't have to change their role to be a research participant, but we can enable healthcare interactions to power research and just be a natural part of one another's worlds.
Yes, I can definitely see that happening, so it'll be interesting to keep an eye on this for all of us in the industry. Now, you guys mentioned that some successful parts from this trial will be used in future trials. And what I'm getting at is, are future clinical trials eventually going to be using a large amount of these tools from this virtual trial that you guys did? Will a lot of these successful parts of it be utilized in the future and just become standard?
We think that there are a number of modules from this study that can improve quality, improve convenience, and generally help make conventional trials more efficient. Whether that's smarter ways to ensure a patient is educated and informed about their decision to participate before signing a consent, using multimedia, using testing, letting them get some of that content from home before perhaps feeling any pressure with study staff, just to cue them up, and hopefully maybe that will free up some of the time of the study staff as well, so that the patient comes in and is more informed when they arrive. How we can use tools for more continuous data capture, different types of sensors and other monitors or other data capture instruments on mobile in the patient's home. But in general, finding ways so that the trial is more convenient and accessible for patients. And if we're looking at a protocol and there are 12 visits that are required over a couple of months, are there some that we can make easier for the patient by letting it happen by phone, by web, or visiting nurse, or through some other means?
Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, how was compliance in this study?
You know, for us, it was good in that, you know, we did have probably a more enriched patient population of activated patients, of engaged patients. Patients opted in knowing, sort of anticipating some of the work and burden and responsibility that would be on them. So we actually had some very, very highly compliant patients for this study.
Okay, and as far as reporting adverse events and things like that, did you guys notice a significant decrease in the amount of adverse events being self-reported?
No, but you know, it's funny. We weren't quite sure coming in will the number be lower, medium, on par, or higher, because we did enable a process where patients could self-report 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, any adverse event. Unfortunately, the enrollment just wasn't enough for us to get a meaningful readout on that. So I think for us, it's still an unanswered question. I'll tell you, it was a question the FDA was also very interested in exploring with us. I think we all were wondering how event reporting will look under a different approach such as this, but unfortunately we just didn't get enough substrate there to read that.
How many subjects were you guys looking for?
We were looking to get about 600 patients into the screening phase, where and then a smaller number would carry over into the randomized phase.
Mm-hmm. And what was the actual number?
It was a couple of dozen.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I mean, I guess we're still a ways away from this being industry standard, but it's definitely like the first anything. You know, it's just a matter of time. And so 2013, you guys are still considering rolling out a new study. that will use some of these elements, or just completely redoing it again?
I think certainly for 2013, we're looking at existing studies that Pfizer is already developing for our molecules, because we have several hundred studies ongoing at any day of the week, and where we can use the pieces that worked. And then we'll keep evaluating if it makes sense for us to try another remote-like effort, which was a little different in that it was a method study, really looking to develop the method. But we feel like there are some pieces that worked, and we want to take advantage of it. You know, it's I think we're very good sometimes at doing pilot studies, and sometimes the harder job for us is figuring out how to really capture what worked and scale it in this big enterprise of clinical development. And that's the challenge that we want to take on over the next few months.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting to see if this scales. Did you guys partner with MediGuard, Quintile's platform, for this trial?
We did do some collaboration with the MediGuard platform from Quintile. So it was a very good group that were very like-minded around some of these new models, and you can see that in the paper that they just published a couple of weeks ago. That clearly they believe that they have a very complementary platform to this type of new approach.
Right. I think the future of social media, even the future of the internet, is just more data heavy. Because right now social media is very touchy-feely. You know, it's about engaging and communicating, things like that, which are important. But I think the future is actually data. You know, a lot of data, a lot of medical records, for example, being uploaded. And I think once we get to that point, we can really start looking at these kind of trials.
You know, Dan, and maybe we'll schedule a follow-up conversation on this, but, you know, when you think about social and you think about data, you can really start to let your mind drift into a very real future state of what happens when that patient walks out of your investigator site and goes online and posts the exact same data to online communities. Mm-hmm. And you're already starting to see groups like Patients Like Me trying to use that data for ongoing studies where patients are posting efficacy and safety data and on investigational drugs, and trying to predict if that trial is going to succeed or fail while it's still ongoing. And that raises a host of really interesting challenges for us.
Oh, tons. I mean, and we'll wrap this up now, and we will have to do a follow-up on this. There was a biotech company that had some of their patients sharing their results online, you know, through social media. And I guess there was such a positive response. The biotech company didn't release the data yet, but investors were buying the stock.
Yeah.
And the stock just shot through the roof. You heard about this, right?
You know, when these things happen, you know, sometimes those picks are going to be right. Sometimes they're going to, you know, call a drug good that really turns out to be bad and set false expectations. Sometimes they may call a drug bad that actually is good, and that can be incredibly disruptive to trying to finish the trial and prove its value. And in those cases, that may end up denying patients a drug that actually would have worked. So this is a very interesting new world, Dan.
Yes. Craig, any closing remarks you'd like to add? You're obviously still a believer in this concept.
You know, to me, this fits within a broader portfolio of opportunities to really continue to transform this space. You spoke to some of it around the important collaborations that we're seeing forming within the industry across other stakeholder groups, a range of other tools from health information technology and other platforms for us to take advantage of. And at the end of the day, hopefully we'll be able to continue to develop the new medicines that patients need, and that's really the desired end state that we're all working towards.
Mm-hmm. And we definitely got to schedule a follow-up interview discussing the future of clinical trials. I just wanted to end this by saying thank you, Craig. Looking forward to future interviews, and I want to give my Clinical Trial Guru producers a shout-out. They get mentioned in every video, so I want to start. Thank you, South Coast Clinical Trials, Sarah Elizabeth Siegler, Resolve Research Solutions, Accurate Clinical Trials, PTNR, Erdhart Clinical Research, Tradestone LLC, Breakthrough Clinical Trials, Kulkarni Law Firm, and Biopharm Systems. And if you want to be a guru producer, It's $99 for a lifetime membership. Lifetime. I mean, you could spend $99 a month on Starbucks. So figure it out. And thank you, Craig. Thank you again for coming on the show, and I look forward to having you on again.
Thanks, Dan. Take care.
Take care.